All right, looks like we're at 11 o'clock a.m. Central Time right now. Wanted to welcome everyone to our second webinar today on our EAB series for our spring webinar series. Today, we're going to have a talk about Emerald Ash Borer Cooperative Management, comprehensive approach to EAB management, both private and public. And so just wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping slides at first. First off, to introduce myself, my name is Eric Lindberg. I'm the lead technical advisor for Rainbow Tree Care Scientific Advancements. Work a lot with kind of companies, municipalities throughout the country on EAB management, and I will be the moderator today. And it is my pleasure to introduce you to the speakers that we have for today. First one is Dr. Robert Haight. Bob is the Research Forest Project Leader for the USDA Forest Service Northern Research Station. And since joining the Forest Service Research in 1987, Bob has studied the economics of wildlife conservation, wildfire management, and invasive species management. He works with stakeholders to build models of resource management systems and quantify the benefits and costs of alternative management policies. His work informs public and private resource managers who allocate significant resources to protect endangered species and protect forests from unwanted disturbances from wildfire and invasive species. Jeff Hafner is the Director of Municipal Consulting. He helps cities develop, adopt, and implement EAB management plans. He's also a member of the American Society of Consulting Arborists, is an ISA certified arborist, and has been working in the horticultural industry for over 20 years. And so additionally, I wanted to go over a couple housekeeping items for today's webinar. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box using your control panel. We'll answer these questions at the end of the presentation. This webinar is also being recorded, and a link will be sent out after the webinar is completed. This webinar is worth one ISA CEU, and if you did not enter in your ISA certification number during registration, please type that into the Q&A portion, and then we'll make sure that you're able to get that CEU. Additionally, this webinar does count for some state pesticide credits if you are in New Jersey or Pennsylvania, or in Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, or Utah. And for each of these areas, we will have a link at the end of the presentation that I'll post into the chat that will, you just go attend that link and answer a couple of questions, and you'll be able to get state pesticide credits for that. And with that, I will go ahead and turn things over to our first speaker today, Dr. Bob Haight.
Okay, Eric, am I good?
You're good to go.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Eric, for that nice introduction. It's really nice to be here with you this morning. My name is Bob Haight, as Eric said. I'm a research forester with the Northern Research Station in the U.S. Forest Service, and I'm in my house right now in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I also will be sharing the platform with Jeff Hafner from Rainbow Tree Care, and we've been working together on emerald ash borer management issues for the last 5 to 10 years. And so it's been a really good collaboration between public research and private management. And the title of our presentation is Emerald Ash Borer Cooperative Management. And I'm going to start off with talking about 2 projects related to the economics of emerald ash borer management in cities. And then I'll pass the baton to Jeff, who will talk about practical experiences in developing management plans for municipalities in the Twin Cities metro and elsewhere. The first project that I wanted to discuss, and I'm going to start off with the take-home messages, is what are the optimal strategies for surveillance, treatment, and removal of ash trees in cities? Our results address quandaries that face urban forest managers, such as whether to invest in surveillance for EAB, whether to treat healthy-looking ash trees, whether to offer rebates to homeowners to treat their trees and whether to cooperate with neighboring cities and EAB management. Our take-home messages for this study are, we found that surveillance is best applied immediately. Waiting to apply management actions risks the buildup of the EAB population, which will cause more damage and economic loss later on. Once surveillance finds an infestation, the optimal strategy is to treat both healthy and newly infested trees in the vicinity of the infestation and remove highly infested trees when they're found to prevent the buildup of the EAB population. Next, significant gains in net benefits can be attained by managing private ash trees together with public ash trees within the city. And finally, significant gains in benefits can be attained by cooperating with neighboring cities in EAB management planning. The second study that I'll talk about addresses the question of how can we design landowner incentive programs for managing emerald ash borer. And we found that a government program that reimburses landowners for treating their ash trees will result in higher net benefits for both the landowners and the city. Okay, see? So now I'll start with the meat of the talk. I always like to introduce my talks with a map that shows the current extent of the EAB infestation. And because of its extent, wide extent, EAB is one of the most economically and environmentally damaging invasive species ever to reach the US. As a reminder, EAB is a wood-boring insect native to Asia and accidentally introduced into North America in the 1990s, probably in crating or pallets that were used, made from ash wood and used in shipping. Since its discovery near Detroit 20 years ago in 2002, EAB has spread widely and killed untold millions of ash trees. And it's increasingly likely that EAB will functionally extirpate one of North America's most widely distributed tree genera, Fraxinus, with devastating ecological and environmental effects. Some of the most extensive damage done by EAB is in cities where it kills ash trees along streets, yards, and parks. And in response, an integrated management strategy called SLAM was recently developed to address infestations in cities. SLAM was developed as a collaboration among Michigan universities and agencies, including APHIS and the Forest Service. The goal of a SLAM project is to slow the onset and progression of ash mortality by slowing the growth of emerald ash borer populations. SLAM management includes surveillance to find infested trees, coupled with insecticide treatment and tree removal within and around the infested area. Surveillance involves sticky traps, visual inspection of trees, or branch sampling to expose the phloem and look for larvae. Surveillance is important because newly infested trees are asymptomatic, while they foster the production of EAB adults, which fly and spread to neighboring trees and infest them. The most common systemic insecticides include emamectin benzoate, which is injected into the base of the tree in the spring and then translocated via the xylem to canopy branches and leaves, where the chemical kills both adult and larval EAB when it's consumed. Studies have shown that this insecticide treatment provides at least 2 years of nearly 100% control of emerald ash borer, provided that the tree healthy or in the early stages of infestation when it's injected. In addition to the insecticide treatment, then tree removal is another option for dealing with EAB. And there we want to try to remove the infested trees before the EAB adults emerge, and also to reduce the amount of phloem available for trees. So in a study of the economics of SLAM beginning in 2016, I led a team that included my colleagues Esra Guia-Takakin and Io Kibas from the New Jersey Institute of Technology, and Kathleen Knight and Charles Flowers of the Forest Service to address the question of what are the optimal strategies for surveillance, treatment, and removal of ash trees in cities. We co-produced this work with city foresters and tree care professionals in the Twin Cities metro, including Jeff Hafner, my partner in this talk. So the first thing we needed in this study was to develop a model to project ash damage and mortality. And so we constructed a stage class model of ash population dynamics subject to an EAB infestation. And this is a novel model, one that isn't typically used, and but it includes all of the details that are needed to make accurate projections of EAB infestations. And so I want to spend a little bit of time discussing it because it's the foundation for making projections of the relative costs of different management strategies. So our formulation assumes that the detectability of an infestation and the efficacy of chemical treatment depend on the level of the tree's infestation. These features are important because EAB may infest ash trees for 1 or 2 years before damage is visible. And also chemical treatment is effective only for ash trees with low to moderate levels of infestation. So the stages of ash health include susceptible trees, which are represented by the S, that are prone to infestation, and then 4 crown classes that are based on infestation levels here. The lower 2 infestation classes include trees that are asymptomatic. In other words, their crowns don't show any damage. And then the 2 higher classes, 3 and 4, have increasing levels of infestation and visible crown damage. The population of trees then in a neighborhood or a city can be fully described by the numbers of trees in the susceptible and 4 infestation tree classes. Then each period, each year, represented by these by the horizontal movement, trees in each infestation class transition to the next infestation class, represented by these dashed lines. The trees in each infestation class yield EAB adults that may infest nearby susceptible trees, which then transition to the first infestation class here. The model is stochastic because the number of newly infested trees is uncertain and depends on the total number of EAB adults produced in the neighborhood and in adjacent neighborhoods. Because the number of newly infested trees is uncertain and newly infested trees are asymptomatic, surveillance is required to estimate the number of trees in each infestation class. And here surveillance takes place in period 2, and the shaded boxes represent no numbers of trees in each class. Following surveillance, then the manager may treat or remove trees from various infestation classes. Susceptible trees and trees in the 2 lowest infestation classes here can be treated with a systemic insecticide, which kills the larvae and prevents infestation for 2 years. And the treatment is represented by these green lines, which show the transition of trees from these classes to the susceptible stage 2 years hence. Trees in the third and fourth classes, which are have visible damage and are irreversibly infested, and those trees may be removed, represented by these black lines here. So we calibrated and validated our stage class model of ash dynamics using 7 years of observations in plots in northern Ohio, which were maintained by my colleagues, Kathleen Knight and Charles Flowers. These 9 graphs compare the model predictions of ash mortality versus observed mortality in those plots in the vicinity of Toledo. And then based on statistical tests and visual comparisons, we concluded that the stage class model provides a valid representation of ash dynamics subject to an infestation and provides fairly accurate projections of how mortality proceeds over time. So the next thing we did is we took our stage class model and applied it to a management problem in the city of Burnsville, which is in southwestern part of the Twin Cities metropolitan area. The city of Burnsville had a EAB, a suspected EAB infestation in 2017. So we determined the optimal sequence of surveillance, treatment, and removal actions to maximize the benefits of healthy ash trees while staying within the available city budget. And the time horizon was 5 years. Our results addressed 2 questions that managers had: whether to invest in surveillance and whether to treat healthy looking ash trees that existed in the city. We found that surveillance with our model is best applied immediately. And waiting to apply the surveillance and management and subsequent management risks the buildup of the EAB population in the city, which would cause more damage and economic loss later on. Once surveillance identifies the new infestation, the optimal strategy is to treat the healthy ash trees and treat healthy ash trees and newly infested ash trees in the vicinity of the new infestation, and then remove any highly infested ash trees that may have been found. If the budget isn't sufficient, then priority should be given to treating the newly infested ash trees and postponing removal of highly infested trees until they die. This optimal strategy, we found, provides significantly higher net benefits to the city than do strategies based on rules of thumb, including the staged removal of ash trees and or the monitoring and removal of ash trees when they become infested. And this is a really important result. Those 2 rules of thumb are commonly applied or maybe commonly applied strategies. For example, in the city of Minneapolis chose to do a staged removal of most of their ash trees in the city. So what we find is that significantly higher benefits can be obtained by protecting the ash population in the city of Burnsville through chemical treatment and limited removals over time. Okay, now I want to shift the focus to municipal cooperation. In 2012, I was part of the team that addressed the question, how much does coordination among cities for the management of the EAB increase urban forest benefits? We used the Twin Cities as a case study because the EAB infestation had recently been discovered in 2009 and because cities were independently developing management plans and setting budgets for EAB control, we wanted to know if the cooperation among cities rather than independent management would improve net benefits to all. So to assess the potential gains from cooperation among cities, we first identified a 300 square kilometer circular study area encompassing the cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Roseville, and the surrounding southern suburbs. The study area was centered on the location of the initial EAB infestation in St. Paul and represented the area that we projected at the time that would be infested in the next 10 years. We divided the study area into 5 cities and applied our stage class model for ash dynamics that I described before. We used the model to evaluate 3 management strategies for the study area. The first was a no action strategy where all 5 cities did nothing except remove ash trees when they were found to be infested. The second strategy is called local management. Here we assumed that each of the 5 cities had different budgets for ash treatment and removal, and each city spent its funding to maximize its own benefits within its own boundaries without cooperating at all with its neighbors. The third strategy is called aggregated management. And here we assume that all of the funding available in 2011 was pooled and then spent to maximize the net benefits across all of the 5 cities. Our main findings were as follows. With no action, most of the ash in the study area is infested within 5 years, resulting in a loss of forest benefits of $300,000. With each city managing according to their local budget, the outcome isn't as bad as no action, but there's still a net loss of forest benefits of $150,000, represented by that blue bar in the center of the figure. Aggregating the budgets and coordinating management among the cities can more than double the urban forest benefits relative to the strategy in which the cities act independently, with a net present value of over $200,000. The take-home message that we got from our modeling study is that a regional management and funding strategy would more effectively control the infestation than an inconsistent city-by-city response or no action. And this was an important result because it led to this sort of a coalition of people approaching the state legislature to aim to get funding for cooperative management in the Twin Cities and in other parts of Minnesota. An important issue in EAB management is the limitation of managing private ash trees. This is important because private ash trees, ones that are in people's yards and are private ash trees often compose a large percent of the urban ash population. In our Twin Cities studies, we looked at 2 scenarios, one with 30% of the ash trees available for treatment and removal, representing the population of public ash trees, and another with 100% of the ash trees available for treatment and removal, representing the population of ash trees on private property and public land. So we used our optimization model to estimate the ash survival and net benefits under each scenario. For the case where 100% of the ash trees were available for treatment, almost 90% of the ash remained after 5 years, and the EAB population was slowed considerably, with the net benefits exceeding $1 million. For comparison, the study with only public ash trees, where only public ash trees could be treated, only about 50% of the ash trees remained after 5 years, and the present value of net benefits was substantially lower. So this result emphasize the importance of managing private ash trees to slow the spread of EAB mortality, of ash mortality in the city, and leads me to my next project, which is ongoing. Here I'm working with my partners, Doctors Esra Briatakanakan and Selena Kai of New Jersey Institute of Technology, and we're addressing the problem of designing landowner incentive programs for managing EABs in cities. So there's a growing interest in designing invasive species management programs that involve transfer or subsidy payments between stakeholders. In our case, we want to design a reimbursement program in which the public forester offers a cost-sharing incentive to private landowners to manage ash trees on their property. The research questions include how much should the rebate be, which landowners should be included. And our hypothesis is that a well-designed incentive program will increase the capacity of government to reduce the damage of EAB and with reduced costs. We're building a model with, and we're developing this study with input from city managers in the state of New Jersey, where Esra and Selena work. So here's an example of a program in which the city managers, where the city reimburses the private landowner based on how many trees the landowner treats. At the beginning of period 1, both the city and the landowner have common knowledge about the number of ash trees present on the private property and the infestation rate. Neither the city nor the landowner knows how many trees are infested on the property. Based on this information, the city offers a reimbursement schedule to the landowner, which lists the amount of the rebate as a function of the number of trees that the landowner decides to treat and is payable after the treatment takes place. Then the landowner, if the landowner accepts this proposition, this reimbursement plan, based on the landowner then would decide whether to accept the reimbursement plan based on their own projection of the net costs of surveillance, treatment, and removal on their property. And if the landowner accepts the plan, then the landowner would identify the infested ash trees and choose how many to treat to maximize its benefits. And then the city, in turn, would reimburse the landowner based on how many trees the landowner treated and what the agreed on schedule was for the reimbursement policy. So the city sets the reimbursement plan for each landowner to maximize the net benefits to the city, given its knowledge of the optimal actions that the landowner would take once they agreed to the plan. So the problem is to design the reimbursement schedule for the landowners, and that we found that the optimal reimbursement schedule depends greatly on the current infestation rate, the cost of treatment, and the landowner's value of having healthy ash trees on their property. For example, let's say the landowner has some infested and uninfested trees, but doesn't know how many infested trees there are. And as a city forester, I don't know how many trees are infested either. So if we agree that the likelihood of infestation is say relatively low, it's best to encourage the landowner to treat all of the trees that they have on their property, however many there are. If the cost of treatment is relatively high relative to the removal cost, or the landowner doesn't value healthy trees very much, a rebate may be necessary in that situation to encourage their treatment. The amount of the rebate increases with the number of trees treated. If the cost of treatment is low relative to removal cost, or the value of the healthy trees is really high, then no rebate may be needed because the landowner would treat the trees, would pay the cost of treating the trees independently of any rebate. In this case, the problem is to tailor the rebate based on the number and size of the landowner's trees, and so that the landowner ends up treating all of them. So for our future work, what we plan to do is scale this rebate model up to neighborhood and city levels. And we need to define different types of landowners based on their number of ash trees, their value and infestation rates, prioritize landowners and neighborhoods for inclusion into the incentive program, given that the city has a limited budget, and then determine the optimal allocation of resources to managing public trees on streets versus private trees on people's property. And we'll be setting up case studies with selected municipalities in New Jersey in the coming year. So then now I want to wrap up with just reviewing the take-home messages one more time. So I've talked about two different research questions. What are the optimal strategies for surveillance, treatment, and removal of ash trees in cities? What we found from our modeling studies is that to maximize economic benefits to the cities is that we want to recommend applying surveillance immediately to find whether or not an infestation exists. Waiting to apply surveillance is risky because if you miss the EAB infestation, it'll grow and increase the amount of damage and economic loss later on. Once surveillance finds an infestation, then the optimal strategy is to use insecticide treatments on both healthy and newly infested trees in the vicinity of the infestation, and then remove highly infested trees to prevent the buildup of EAB. Significant gains in net benefits can be attained by managing private ash trees together with public ash trees within the city. Finally, significant gains in net benefits can be attained by cooperating with neighboring cities and planning your EAB management strategy. The last study I discussed was the question of how can we design a landowner incentive program for managing EAB, and our ongoing research suggests that reimbursing landowners based on the number of trees they treat would be the most cost-effective way for a government to design a landowner incentive program. So that concludes my presentation, and now I want to turn the mic and the video over to Jeff, who will talk about his experiences in managing, in developing EAB management plans for municipalities and public cooperation. So I'm looking for the stop share button. There we go. And now, Jeff, over to you.
Thanks, Bob. Hi, everyone. Glad you could join us. I'll be picking up right in the middle of all of Bob's work that he shared. And as he mentioned, he and I have been collaborating for almost 10 years on EAB management in the Twin Cities, largely off of the models he discussed, and then really looking for how that science could be applied in the real world on the streets of the cities in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area. So I'm going to share my screen. Just like that. And in hearing no one say they can't see it, I will assume that everyone can see it. And I want to start by reviewing two of the cornerstone studies that really advanced the work with municipalities in managing ash trees. And the first one Bob mentioned was this first study to really call out the acronym SLAM, looking at slowing ash mortality. And really what the big takeaways from this study were the idea that with some treatment applied early on, you could keep trees alive. And that's both treated and untreated trees alive. So this graph really shows that with no treatment, the number of trees, that's this number over here, declines over 10 years to almost none. So we call this the death curve. It's been widely called the death curve since really this work was done. Without treatment, ash trees succumb to EAB attack and die quickly. However, by applying some level of treatment, and in this case, this model looked at treating 10%, we could slow the rate of ash mortality to a much longer timeline. And by treating 20%, we could essentially keep all of the ash trees alive. Now, later I'll talk about kind of what limits we have in applying this model, but this was the first study that really got the management group at that time looking at what could be done with managing ash trees. The second study Bob mentioned was his work on, reviewing what coordination among cities would look like and how that could reduce cost and increase benefits. And this study was really groundbreaking at the time because it suggested an idea that did not exist at the time, and that's that an uninfested city would do itself a lot of benefit by contributing EAB management funds outside of its borders to its neighboring cities, so that the infested cities could do more work to keep the pest population down, and thereby reducing the rate at which it would spread into the uninfested cities. So that was another big piece of contributing to the idea that more could be done if we looked at managing emerald ash borer with tree protection. And so once those models really predicted success, I started looking at just how is that success achieved in both the SLAM model and with cooperation. And here is just an image of the EAB life cycle, which a lot of people really get by this point. And that red section where larvae are feeding under the bark, that is where we target death to the insect with our tree injection. So those treated trees will kill larvae that are feeding under the bark. And that's where a lot of the emphasis is put, because we really have to do these treatments one tree at a time, over and over again, to protect that individual tree. But the SLAM model and Bob's work in looking at how cities could cooperate for higher net benefit also took into account how a treated tree has toxic leaves that are fed on by adults. So right between emergence and when the insects lay eggs, those adults have to feed on neighboring trees. So they would fly around to multiple different trees and feed on the leaves before they reproduce. If during that flight time, they encounter protected trees, they feed on toxic leaves, and their life cycle is interrupted. So while we target the larva directly with the injection, having those protected trees in those tree communities has kind of a halo effect as adults fly into them and are killed as well. So those are really the two parts of the life cycle that we target with EAB injections, or really ash tree protection. And that has been an evolution in my thinking over the years, expanding beyond just tree injection as a way to save individual trees, but now including tree injection as a way to suppress insect population. So the tree protection is really both tree protection and insect suppression. And that's like an evolution of the thinking and really an expansion of how those benefits are arrived. So I'll just kind of repeat some of the things Bob talked about. The research time and time again continues to demonstrate that tree protection is better than removal and replacement. And I think about it better. For me as an arborist, it's better because you keep more mature trees. But, the economic studies really look at better being higher net gain with lower net cost. And, the graphic there really highlights like a big shade tree has more benefit. And in the case of tree protection is arrived at with less cost than a removal and then a replacement, which is expensive to get to that removed tree plus replacement tree. And then the benefit of that replacement tree being significantly reduced from the mature tree that stood previously. Also, for me, the strategies and benefits of both the SLAM model and that economic analysis really work at any scale. And that is where I think there's a lot of opportunity for tree care providers and tree managers to take the information that the models are looking at and really apply it to your day-to-day work. While the SLAM model predicts some level of protection for non-treated trees, if you can get 20% of the trees treated, you can reduce that down to even a neighborhood level. And in this thumbnail, you can see a homeowners association that has a lot of ash trees, and all of them being under protection reduces the likelihood that there's any pest pressure at that neighborhood level. So the SLAM model is predicting benefits that they can apply even down to that tiny scale. And really, I didn't even go down to the individual property level scale, but the same can be true there. If you're protecting your trees, that area has less insect pressure than if you didn't have those trees protected. At the city level, you see these benefits really, really grow, and conversely, the pest pressure really, really diminish, because now you have thousands and thousands of treated trees over a much larger geographical area, which is affecting that pest population for many more square miles, providing a whole lot more benefit. And then as we continue to expand, multiple cities working together, or at least in a similar strategy, starts to positively impact that pest pressure by protecting more and more trees. And then you could really take that all the way up to a state. And as Bob mentioned, his economic work really highlighted the advantages of a centralized management strategy with a centralized funding strategy, which has been difficult to really see come to life, because as you get further from a known infestation, it's harder and harder to get people to write the checks, because they don't see their direct benefit. So if you're 400 miles from a known infestation, you may not see the benefit of paying into a EAB management fund that you can't use directly. Research has also really continued to demonstrate that all ash tree owners benefit when we slow tree mortality. So in this graphic, you can see in purple are public ash trees under protection, adjacent to a private development that also has ash trees under protection. So this relationship, while separate budgets and separate sets of goals and separate jurisdictions on what they can actually protect, are still going to have benefit for that neighboring jurisdiction. That public park, in this case a golf course, will have no insects harboring there in untreated trees and flying into and applying insect pressure to the untreated trees in the neighborhood, and vice versa. So you see this time and time again in all of those models that Bob described, the idea that as we treat trees, insects don't move to untreated trees, and you get a higher net benefit. Now, this is an arrangement that's really kind of a coincidence, although that private development happens to be in a municipality that is treating public trees, and there's an inherent kind of sanctioning of that activity, and in this case, reduced pricing for homeowners, which I will also discuss. There are, however, limits to fully implementing all of those models or implementing those studies on the ground. The biggest and most difficult to wrestle with is really the unknown infestation date. So that first SLAM model really looked at what the benefit would be of treating 20% of the known ash trees, essentially when EAB is introduced into the environment. So you can imagine if you had that level of tree protection in place when EAB arrived, there would be a head start on tree protection and an inability for the insect population to really grow. However, we never have the ability to know exactly when EAB arrives. And Bob's work was also really highlighting how that surveillance is always money well spent, that communities should never forego surveillance for any other EAB activity. In my experience, it has also proven very impractical to transfer funds between tree owners. So the idea that an uninfested city would do itself a lot of good by contributing to a neighboring infested city's EAB management fund is really difficult to generate support for. And municipalities typically aren't structured in a way that allow them to contribute to neighboring cities. There are also jurisdictional limitations to those ideal tree volumes. Again, the models are, as Bob mentioned, looking at what would the benefits be if we had 100% of the available trees or 100% of the ash trees available to apply our strategies. And municipalities really have a limitation on where they can go onto the private side. And because on the private side, there are a lot of ash trees, it's tough to really start a plan that you can implement that uses all of the trees in your strategy. You just can't, you don't have the jurisdiction to bring them into your strategy. And the last one that really stands out to me is that, in my opinion, trees have not obtained kind of the privileges that are associated with infrastructure status. And I'll talk about this a little more. And one way this really struck me is when you look at how municipalities manage their streets. And here is a graphic I found. It's called the Pavement Condition Index. Now, the red line is showing what happens to street conditions, pavement conditions, if some years after it's installed, no maintenance is done. So you get a 40% drop in quality over 75% of its life, and another 40% drop in quality with only 12% of its life. So you can see an accelerating deterioration of that infrastructure, in this case pavement, if no maintenance is applied. However, this black line up here highlights the benefit of applying maintenance costs, maintenance funds over time to keep that condition of that infrastructure at a higher level. And so you can imagine spending less over time and keeping those streets and that pavement in better condition. Now, if you think about the shape of that graph and that maintenance line, you can kind of see a sharp similarity in this death curve line here. This is trees dying in a short amount of time with no maintenance versus this increased amount of maintenance up here, some amount. In this case, this was 20% treatment, or I'm sorry, 10% treatment. This allows that infrastructure component to stay at a higher level, of a higher condition level with spending less. So that was really stark to me because on the left, we have what is a widely accepted pavement management strategy, but on the right, it is not a widely accepted tree management strategy. And that's where if trees were truly given the same level of attention that a lot of our city infrastructure is, this would be how we manage trees. We would understand that some level of maintenance is required to keep these infrastructure components functioning at their highest level because we yield such benefits from them. So another question that came up a lot for me is if I'm convinced, which I am, that cooperative EAB management is the way to go, well, then what size area is ideal? And a multi-state approach could be great, but it's possibly too large, that the infestation could be many miles away and really difficult for those local governments to see the benefit. And as I mentioned before, a state approach could be a really good size. There's a logical order. There's familiar jurisdictional structures. There's state legislatures and funding strategies and funding avenues. So that could be a really good approach, but state government can be slow to wade through and kind of unwieldy in its size and isn't, in my experience, always as responsive to a kind of current threat as EAB, because really EAB moves so quickly that it requires a more accelerated response that state governments can be difficult to get moving. Now, at the regional level, in this case, the Twin Cities metro area is a designated region. That can be a wieldy cooperative group because there can be cooperative environmental agreements that already exist. If you imagine bordering cities, they do share some streets that go through multiple cities. They do share water systems or sewer systems. There's already agreements in place. So it could be a good template on which to build an EAB cooperative strategy. The cities, though, in my experience, have really been the sweet spot. The money there remains within the jurisdiction, and there's an opportunity to incentivize that homeowner participation. As Bob mentioned, his future work is really looking at even going beyond just a kind of non-fiduciary incentive, moving to a true like payback to homeowners to take action. And as I showed before, that even that neighborhood level can really do a lot of good work together. They can mobilize quickly. They don't always have the funding structures in place, but there's a strong focus on that neighborhood tree canopy because they live under those trees, that they're more directly related to and associated with those trees, that the threat seems more real and the group can be small and quickly mobilized. So in that question of what size is ideal, the best program success is going to be achieved when there is some level of effort or some element of effort happening at all levels. Even if it's not a full state funded approach, having conversations at the state legislature about EAB being a thing that should be focused on helps, all the way down to that neighborhood group, having residents engaged in conversations about trees being important and actions being taken really helps support from the top down and the bottom up. But with cities, I would say that is the easiest place to implement a program. And I say easy, not because it's going to be easy, it's just easier. So my next step in this process was really looking to implement a science-based solution. So I took the two cornerstone studies and working with a retired city planner, we developed a model emerald ash borer management plan. And this plan is available. If you're interested in a copy, we're happy to send you one. Just let us know. It's not short. It's very comprehensive, and it outlines a lot of goals and steps, a lot of actions that can be taken. It's written with Minnesota as a focus, but it's an outline that's certainly applicable anywhere you have ash trees and you anticipate getting EAB. So really, once we had consolidated this science-based solution into a model plan, then it was just a matter of taking that solution to city stakeholders. And I just took a quick snapshot of a room that is an actual room where these decisions are being made. It's not glamorous. It's not exciting necessarily, but that is where the funding strategies for infrastructure projects are being made. And having a voice for trees in those rooms is really, really important. And the more I found traction in forming this conversation really founded in a scientific approach, the listening of that group just got better and better as far as like spending less and keeping more when it came to managing infrastructure and managing EAB. So then from those meetings really comes like a next step of management plan and an RFP or a request for proposal from a municipality to have services happen in the city on those public trees. And in most cases, it was requests for proposals on public tree protection. Once the municipalities are really enrolled in the idea that trees are their infrastructure and that the science supports ash tree management through tree injection, then it was really just looking at what are the plan elements in that model plan and how would they show up in a request for proposal. So the management plan is really just a scalable version of SLAM. As I said before, those models are scalable to any level. And this sweet spot of working with the municipality is where this model EAB plan focused. It incentivizes private tree owner participation, but it doesn't require it. As Bob mentioned, his future work is really looking at what could happen as far as incentivizing those private tree owners. But at this point, we're just incentivizing it passively through either discounted pricing or just sanctioning the effort of tree protection as a strategy that works for everybody. The model also includes goals of accurate budget and tree tracking mechanisms that not only helps the plan get adopted, but it helps track participation because as city leaders kind of adopt these plans and take the risk, it's really important that they are able to brag about that program success. And when done right, there's lots to brag about for sure. Now, in that RFP side, that request for proposal, then the municipality is looking to require contractor participation in education and outreach because you want to amplify both voices on the issue and reaching homeowners through multiple channels because you have to hear the information a lot before you're really enrolled in taking action. A lot of these RFPs require GIS infrastructure as well for tree tracking, and the tree tracking points directly at that tracking participation of the private side so that you can measure program success. Now, when these RFPs become, adopted and put out, then neighboring cities start to see it being a strategy that works, and they can, request copies. So when the RFPs become shared and utilized by multiple municipalities, then you can start to see a pseudo-cooperative management approach being created. Now, remember, the bioeconomic analysis that Bob was a part of really said cities should just be working together. But as we kind of discovered that was going to be difficult, this became a strategy for success to just take it kind of one city at a time. And as they began, especially with bordering cities, to all begin to implement the same strategies, it starts to function the same way. And I can kind of show you that in a second. The big thing, though, is the foundational premises for cities to incentivize that private tree owner participation is because the death curve and the rate that EAB kills ash trees, they are the biggest obstacles to that orderly transition of current tree populations. Now, forests, whether they're natural or urban, are constantly transitioning. Trees are aging, trees are dying, and new trees are getting planted. And EAB and its quick attack of the ash trees throws that transition into a state of disorder. It's too fast, it's too rapid, it's too expensive, and the transition gets really out of order. So the more we can increase the number of treated trees in that given population, that death curve begins to flatten. And this has been said a few different ways, and I want to just keep bringing us back to that part. Anytime you're increasing the number of trees in an ash tree population, you're decreasing the number of insects, which allows for more time for all ash tree owners to transition away from ash trees, whether they keep both their ash trees or just treat one for a long time, one for a short time, and replant it. There's so much more options available to people, so many more options when treatment is a key component of the strategy. And when we reduce those peak tree deaths, then all the accompanying tasks and costs are also reduced. So here's what I was mentioning before. When one city develops EAB management plans and goals, develops that RFP, and then shares it, then a neighboring city can do the same. And you just see that cycle go round and round, really developing what is essentially a pseudo-cooperative approach. They keep their own money within their jurisdiction, but they are benefiting from their neighboring cities' attack on that insect population through tree protection. So my conclusions, the science of EAB management continues to evolve. As Bob mentioned, there are still studies ongoing. We may think we know all about EAB biology, and we do know a lot, but the science of managing it on what we know about the biology, especially as we look at more cooperative arrangements and what could be more successful, will continue to evolve. And that those studies continue to suggest that the more we cooperate, especially when we include treatment, they return higher yields. Yield higher returns at lower costs. So you get more benefit out of your tree canopy with reduced costs. And we know that management plan goals should be aimed at aligning all ash tree owners in that unified strategy. We maximize the benefits from cooperation when we're all working toward the same goal of tree protection. And those scalable cooperative agreements are possible at all geographic levels, the neighborhood, the city, the region, and the state. But those municipal scale programs are so influential on those private tree owners, and that's where so many of the trees are. So as cities and tree groups begin to look for ways to enroll those private tree owners into tree protection, we start to see those benefits get higher and higher. So that is it for me. I believe it's time for questions. I'll stop my share and be the only one back on the screen. I think Eric is going to moderate questions.
Yes. I'm just hopping on right now. I just want to go over a quick couple things. For any questions that you have, please type those into the Q&A box using the control panel. I'll go ahead and answer some of those questions as we receive them. Additionally, I did put in the chat, someone had requested about that management plan that Jeff was just talking about. I put a link in there where you can access that. Additionally, as you're typing in some of the questions, just wanted to remind everyone that we have a couple of upcoming webinars coming up as well that are EAB related. The next one's going to be on April 6th, and as well as May 6th, there's going to be a live demonstration on doing some of these treatments. So I will pull up right now. First question, and Jeff, I think this was in relation to one of your earlier slides. It said, in the study of the Twin Cities, were there any firewood transport restrictions enforced? There's a multiple part question. Additionally, were there approved contractor lists for removals? And if a rebate is approved, were approved contractors required?
So in Minnesota, the firewood regulation is done through the Department of Ag in partnership with APHIS, I believe. So the quarantines are set at the national level and enforced at the state level. The second part was regarding contractors. Sorry, Eric, can you go back? I couldn't track it all. The
Sure.
second part was about, yeah, go ahead.
Were there approved contractor lists for removals?
Yes, in a lot of cases there are. Certainly, there's a lot of local city licensing required for tree care contractors, regardless of the tree care service. That's in the Twin Cities. In areas where the municipality wants to create a program that offers discounted or at least agreed upon removal prices, then that is a separate request for proposals for contractors to provide pricing based on tree size and location. And those agreements are throughout the Twin Cities in different levels.
Yeah, and the last part of that question was, if a rebate is approved, were approved contractors required?
In some cases, yes. In the minority of cases, there are programs that have just approved contractors with agreed upon prices. The kind of full scale program that I highlighted in the model to RFP really highlight the benefit of having one tree care provider that's awarded the contract for public and private tree injection. Because then you get one unified message with that partner and the municipality. They're working more as a team rather than a group of contractors all maybe communicating separately. So it's one contractor awarded both the public and private trees.
Okay. And so waiting for a couple other questions to come through. The question came through us, and this may not be on topic. I believe that ash for Major League Baseball comes from a fairly small geographic area in Pennsylvania and maybe New York. Has MLB been engaged about helping with EAB research or control funding?
I don't know. That seems like one for Bob. Have you heard from Major League Baseball, Bob?
Not lately. I think Major League Baseball was engaged in the early stages of the EAB infestation in the mid 2000s because they were worried about their baseball bats. But I think that the adjustments have taken place and baseball bats are made out of a variety of wood.
Yeah, interesting enough, I think I was reading an article about that because, yeah, the majority of the baseball bats that are used in the MLB were made out of ash trees. And I think with emerald ash borer, they've started transitioning. I almost want to say it might even be sugar maple. I don't know off the top of my head, but I remember that was something that they started shifting over to. But that would be a good one. There's a lot of money in Major League Baseball.
Good question. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think Western states have any hope of avoiding EAB infestation?
What do you think, Bob?
No, I think emerald ash borer will arrive in the Western states eventually. I think, Jeff, what's the status of EAB in the Rockies right now?
Yeah, well, it's been a while since I've been there. Eric might actually know more than me. And what I'll say before I'll let Eric answer that is that the Western states have by far the best opportunity to not be devastated by EAB. That while infestation is almost certainly coming their way, there's so much more information now that it doesn't have to devastate anyone's canopy.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, where it's currently at in regards to the Rocky Mountain area, it's over in Boulder, kind of started over in that area, and it hasn't gotten into Denver proper just yet, but it is in the surrounding areas currently, as well as making its way over to Fort Collins too. So far, it has not moved outside of Colorado into Utah just yet. But as Jeff was indicating, I think this is a great time to be proactive in your management plans associated with that. Additionally, EAB is in Texas currently as well. It is started over again in the Fort Worth area and has slowly been making its way over to Dallas, currently over in Denton County as of right now. Has not been found in Dallas proper just yet, but there's some continuous monitoring happening there. But for those who are over in the Western states, especially in some areas that, ash is a highly prominent tree, now is really the time to start getting a plan in order for when it inevitably makes its way over there. Okay. What is the latest information on white fringe trees' susceptibility to EAB?
I don't know. I don't have anything updated other than it has been shown to allow an EAB to complete its life cycle. Yeah,
I could probably answer some of that. In regards to the white fringe tree, as Jeff had indicated, they did find that it's the EAB is allowed to complete its life cycle. I do not believe that its fecundity as high in with the white fringe tree as in relation to anything in the Fraxinus genus. But it could be, this is where, my mind goes to thinking into what the future looks like. If you're in an area where emerald ash or ash trees as well as white fringe trees exist, and if ash trees are depleted out of that area, then, if EAB is in that particular area, then its only option is going to be the white fringe tree, and you might see more attacks with that. But for that, ash is by far still the preferential host associated with it. So I think it's something to kind of monitor. And if EAB is if you're in a high pressure area and you have some white fringe trees present in that area, you could look at potentially treating them. But I would for sure be monitoring it. But ash by far the most prominent that it's going to be attacking. I don't know if either of you guys have any other thoughts with that. And let's give it a couple seconds to see if any other questions. All right, we got another one. Some Western states are monitoring for EAB major transportation corridors, identifying ash locations close to highways. One of the ways EAB can be introduced is with transportation of nursery materials and debris. Don't know if that question got cut off, but yeah, I think it's a great thing to be monitoring some of the EAB and some of these transportation corridors. I think there was a research article that came out just last year, and that was with Kevin Chase from Bartlett, and they're finding a correlation with EAB spread actually correlating with railroad tracks. So that is a possibility for spread with that. Any thoughts around that?
Oh, sorry, Eric. Go ahead.
No. I was going to say, I was just going to turn around to you guys to see if you had any thoughts.
Yeah. Transportation corridors are really important, especially. I think that there's probably transport in packing material still. So any industrial, transportation hubs are locations where I would focus my monitoring if I was a city out west or any city.
Sure. And probably kind of along those lines, and just asked what kind of monitoring could some of these Western states be doing?
Well, I remember I lived in Oakland, California when I was a graduate student, and the city of Oakland had planted white ash trees up and down their boulevards. And I mean, it just is good practice. I would be monitoring those trees pretty carefully to look for crown decline, and also around transportation hubs where, trucking firms and so forth.
Yeah, and I can absolutely support that, and also suggest that if you don't know where all your ash trees are, now is a great time to figure that out.
Yeah. What about any sort of trapping or baiting? Do you suggest to do any of that in areas where EAB is not present?
You can go first, Bob.
Yeah, sticky traps are fairly cheap to deploy and search, but they aren't fully effective. In other words, that there's false negatives are pretty common. So that I think those sticky traps are probably something that should be addressed at a state level. If the state is going to be serious about looking for EAB out west, that the state should invest some money. I do know that the APHIS, which is the regulatory body that looks at interstate transport and regulation, has decided, I think, to get out of the EAB business now. And so it's going to be up to the states to decide.
Sorry.
I was going to change the subject, but go ahead.
Well, just in the conversation of traps, Deb McCullough's early work in that SLAM model used like tree sinks, where they found areas of small ash trees, maybe in woodland areas, and girdled them at the base to elevate the stress level, because EAB in initial levels of infestation or early levels of infestation will prefer stressed trees. So by creating a group of highly stressed trees, you can incentivize insects to move in that direction and let them stand for a season, fell them, and then debark them to see if any EAB are present. That can be kind of a higher cost, but maybe higher accuracy level of testing for EAB's presence as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. That's often done right here in the Twin Cities to see how to detect neighborhood spread. I wanted to, since there are no other questions, I wanted to give describe sort of a brief update on the breeding of ash trees for resistance. And the Forest Service has a research program that has been going on for the last 5 years or so to identify ash trees in the upper Midwest that survived the initial wave of EAB infestation. And they've taken cuttings from those trees back to the lab and developed tests to determine whether EAB is, whether that material from those trees is palatable to the emerald ash borer in the lab or not. And then for the trees that for whatever reason the EAB don't eat, then they're developing breeding strategies to try to create lines that are resistant, that appear to be resistant. And I'm fairly confident that in the years ahead that EAB resistant ash trees will be developed.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, just like elm trees have been bred and developed that are mostly resistant to Dutch elm disease.
So just posted in the chat. I think it's really interesting that you brought that up, Bob. I live in Pennsylvania and notice how particular trees get absolutely hammered while others remain relatively unaffected, at least so far.
Yeah, and so what the scientists are trying to do is to understand what it is about those surviving ash trees that made them survive, that helped them survive.
Yeah. Additionally, in the chat, I posted a link for a EAB municipal management guide that Jeff Hafner was involved with writing last year. It just provides some kind of tips and tools around EAB municipal management. It's a free guide. The link is there. Feel free to access that at any point in time. Okay. Not seeing any other questions come up. And so with this, wanted to thank everyone for attending. At the completion of this, there will be a 5-minute, survey that we ask for you to fill out. Feedback helps us improve some of these free educational webinars. And additionally with it, if you are in any of the states mentioned in here, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and Utah, this webinar does allow for pesticide applicator credits associated with it. I just posted the link in the chat. And so feel free to click on that particular link for the state that corresponds to where you are at. And just follow the instructions with that to obtain pesticide applicator credits for that. A couple people jumping in on the Q&A, just saying great information and thanking you guys for your time. And so additionally with it, want to say thank you to both of you for participating and presenting today. This is really good information. And we appreciate everyone for jumping on today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Jeff. It's great to see you all.
You too.
Yeah.
Bye.
Right. See y'all later. Bye.